Hey, my name is Rowan Smith and I want to welcome you to the Training for Trekking podcast. Now, this is the world's very first podcast which is entirely dedicated to helping you train, prepare and conquer your upcoming hike, trek or mountain adventure. So once a week, I'm going to be giving you quality and practical information on the subjects of physical preparation for trekking, dealing with altitude and nutrition on the trail, so you can know everything you need to be doing to have the best chance of a safe, enjoyable and successful adventure. So now you know what you're in for. Let's get into today's episode. Hello guys. Today we are talking all about how a hiker can improve their mobility. Now, often I talk about on this podcast how mobility or range of motion through certain muscles and joints is very, very important. Now, for example, I've often talked about when it comes to knee pain, that mobility through your ankles and your calves, as well as your hips, is incredibly important to help keep your knee stable. And if they're too tight, then it can cause the body to compensate and cause pain, discomfort, and other issues. And in many different situations, hikers will have particular muscles that are tight, which they want to sort of relieve and improve a little bit of range of motion, which is very, very common. But what is not common and what is very, very rare is for someone out there to actually improve their range of motion. And they might be doing certain actions in their week, they might be doing stretching or foam rolling, and they might be doing that constantly, but it doesn't actually make any difference. And it might give them some relief from discomfort and pain and make them feel good, but if they actually tested their range of motion from week 1 to week 10 of what they're doing, 95% of the time there is absolutely no change. And this is because just doing a few random stretches here and there, or not having a structured approach, or not doing particular things in your mobility work, it generally won't do much. Yes, it will make you feel good. Yes, it probably will relieve tight muscles and sort of make you feel a little bit more relaxed and a little bit more comfortable, but it won't improve your range of motion very well. So today we're going to dive into a little bit detail around if you are in the situation where you're aware if you have super tight calves, super tight hips, super tight glutes, a super tight upper back or something like that, and you do want to improve range of motion, how you can go about it in an effective way, which isn't just guessing, which isn't just giving you very, very half-hearted results, but something that can definitely make a good difference in a reasonable amount of time. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. Now, a few common mistakes I see from hikers, which I want to tick off before we begin in this situation, which I hear from hikers pretty much every week. And these are a few things that I always see is number one, doing mobility and stretching at the end of a workout, and that's all they do. And so they'll do a stair session, a hill session, a strength session, whatever it may be, and then they say, look, I'm going to do 10 minutes of stretching at the end of a session. And there's nothing wrong with this, absolutely not. But the issue here is if you're doing it at the end of a session, many times, if anything comes up, if you get bored, if you get busy, if you've got a commitment coming up, that session will just get thrown out the window when you have to get out of the gym or get back to work, whatever, earlier. And once you throw it out the window once, it gets easier and easier and easier. And I'm sure there's a lot of listeners here who've been in this situation where they sort of promise themselves, all right, I'm going to do my workout, I'm going to stretch, and then I'm going to get to my day. And they'll do that for a couple of weeks, then they'll shorten the stretch down to 5 minutes. Do that for a couple of weeks, then they'll shorten the stretch down to one stretch. Do that for a couple of weeks, and then they forget about stretching. And then it just turns into this habit where they just never stretch. And so there's nothing inherently wrong with stretching after a session, and if you can commit yourself to doing that, absolutely go ahead. But I don't think you're really setting yourself up for success if that's all you're saying you're going to do. And I'm going to explain how to fit it in a little bit later in the episode. Another common mistake I often see is just not doing a stretch for long enough. So they might be in this situation where they're stretching after a session or doing a designated stretching session. And someone will just hold a stretch for 15-20 seconds and they'll start to feel good and they're like, sweet, I'll do another stretch. That will make you feel good and that will help you sleep, it'll help you relax, it'll help muscles feel a little bit nicer. But if you're trying to improve range of motion, it's probably not long enough. Ideally, in certain situations when you're trying to improve range of motion, you want to be holding a stretch for about 60 seconds or more. Usually beforehand, it's not really going to be enough. So that's an important point to be aware of. And then another common mistake I often see is only doing foam rolling. And someone's like, look, I'm super tight, I need to improve range of motion, and I'm just going to roll for 30 minutes every single day. And foam rolling is great. Again, I absolutely love it and I include it in most people's preparation. It's great for relaxing, it's great for calming the body down, great for reducing muscle soreness, and it's also great for improving range of motion, but only in the short term. So if you're only doing foam rolling and you're not doing particular mobility or stretching exercises, you'll improve your range of motion for half an hour, for 60 minutes, for 2 hours, whatever it may be, but it'll go back to normal eventually. Foam rolling only improves range of motion in the short term. So it can be very, 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 very effectively paired with stretching, but if you're just doing that by itself, it's probably not going to change things. So now that you've gone over the common mistakes, my process for improving mobility, and I want to run you through that. So if a hiker comes to me, and if I take them through the initial assessments and they've got super tight calves, or they've got super tight hips, or whatever it may be, and I'm like, look, we want to improve this a little bit, we want to increase range of motion a little bit, this is what I do. So number one is I always have a targeted warm-up with mobility exercises. So in all of my workouts, whether it's hiking, whether it's stair training, whether it's strength training, there is always a targeted warm-up with specific mobility exercises and not just foam rolling. So there will be a little bit of foam rolling, but that's not only what I'm doing. And the key point here is we're basically going to do a targeted warm-up before every single training session. So if you're training 3 or 4 times a week, you're going to be going through those mobility exercises 3 or 4 times a week. It's not just going to be a once a week affair. It's not just going to be a twice a week affair, but you're getting exposure to that mobility exercises. You're getting exposure to those stretching exercises, and that's really the key thing. So always, always, always have a targeted warm-up with mobility exercises before a session. Area number 2 is adding in mobility exercises to rest periods of strength training. So as I've said a few times on this podcast before, it's a really, really good way to use your rest periods. Generally, what I will do is just make sure in a rest period of strength training, we'll generally do about 60 seconds of stretching, but stretching a muscle which isn't particularly working in that strength exercise. Now, the reason why we want to do this is there is some evidence to show that holding a long static stretch on a particular muscle will reduce its power output in the short term if you're just going into strength training. So for example, if I was doing deadlifts and I was trying to do a set of deadlifts and then stretching my hamstrings for 60 seconds afterwards and then going back to deadlifts, there's the potential maybe it might reduce my strength very, very slightly. Really, it's not the end of the world, but if you want to be smart about it, you probably want to be avoiding it. So what I do instead is if I'm doing a deadlift, I might do a stretch on my hips, or I might do a stretch on my calves, or some other muscle which isn't directly really working in that particular exercise. So in every single strength exercise or every single strength sequence that I do, there'll always be a mobility exercise just to break up those rest periods. And that's a really effective way of just, again, adding in a little bit extra exposure to this stretching throughout the week. At the end of a session, what I like to do is instead of doing just say 10 minutes of random stretches at the end of a session, I often like to get a little bit more targeted with this. So what I will do is I'll choose one body part, so one area that really needs a little bit extra work, and I'll do what's called a foam rolling and stretch combo. So I'll either get a foam roller or a ball or some type of self-myofascial release thing, and I'll get into that body part for 2 to 3 minutes on each side. So for example, if we were working on the lats, so the side of your back, and we were like, we want to work on that, improve range of motion there, we'll spend about 2 or 3 minutes rolling into that side, really, really releasing it, getting that increase in short-term range of motion, and then immediately after, we'll do a long stretch on that particular muscle. So then we'll do a lat stretch for 2 to 3 minutes, and that'll take you anywhere from 10 to 12 minutes to get all that done, rolling and combo as a stretch combo of long term, like holding each one for long. But if you just choose one body part per workout and really, really go targeted and really, really spend a bit of time on it, I find that's a lot more effective at improving range of motion instead of doing 10 1-minute stretches if you just target one particular muscle. Obviously, there's no right or wrong way to go about that. If you prefer breaking up your stretching, absolutely go ahead. But if you're really trying to improve range of motion at a certain point, it's probably worthwhile doing that. And then on top of this, if necessary, I'll probably add in some designated stretch sessions through the week. So I'll probably break up a combination of a little bit of foam rolling, a little bit of stretching on a few different body parts throughout the week. And this will help your muscle recovery, this will help you de-stress, but also just give you a little bit extra exposure to this mobility work. Now, if you touch all those 4 points, you're doing mobility in your warm-ups in every single workout, you're doing mobility exercises in your rest periods in your strength training, you're choosing to do a foam rolling and stretch combo at the end of your workouts, and then potentially adding in some designated stretch sessions in the week, you can get a whole bunch of work done in a week. You can get a whole bunch of exposure exposure towards this mobility work in a week, and after about 4, 5, 6 weeks, you probably will notice some pretty significant changes. It really doesn't take a huge amount of extra time out of your training if you're going about that, but it can be very, very effective. So if you're in the situation where you've been hiking for a while, you've been training for a while, and you're just aware that, look, my hips are really tight, my calves are really tight, something is giving me trouble and it's just not training, maybe you might want to think about going about a different way with your mobility work. Have a think about what I've talked about today, have a think about those common mistakes, and have a think about that process that I've gone through. Apply that into your week, apply that into your training, and I would I think it was very likely that you'll notice a pretty big difference. So if you did want to explore a little bit more around this subject, if you wanted some specific mobility exercises for certain body parts, you wanted some specific foam rolling exercises for certain body parts, or anything like that, I highly recommend you join up on the Training for Hiking and Trekking Facebook group. Now in this group, every single day I'm releasing new content around training for hiking, and particularly we dive into a little bit more specific detail around certain exercises, certain workouts, and certain strategies, which can be delivered in video format or via live chats on there. So if you did want to learn a little bit more about this subject or anything else we touched on the podcast, I highly recommend you join up there and I'll be able to help you out. So thank you so much for listening today. I hope you've got some good insight around mobility work for hikers, and we'll talk to you very, very soon. Bye.